war lange, manche zu lange Korrespondent der Frankfurter Allgemeinen Zeitung hier in Brüssel. Und eigentlich sollte ich jetzt, ich ein Jahr im Ruhestand bin, im Ruhestand alles etwas gelassener sehen, aber das fällt in diesen Tagen natürlich nicht besonders leicht. If you don't understand any German, don't worry. The upcoming discussion with Eszter Zalan from the Brussels-based news organization EU Observer, whom I welcome here, welcome Eszter, will be held in English. Eszter is a widely respected Hungarian journalist who has been around in Brussels for, I think, almost a decade. She was a correspondent for Hungary's then largest daily newspaper, Stabenow. It's difficult, perhaps you help me afterwards to pronounce it properly, but you know, since 2015, she covers a range of subjects for EU Observer. I should also mention that Eszter is co-founder of Eurologgers, a news blog, which was founded by the independent and largest Hungarian news portal, index.hu. And finally, Eszter is also a co-recipient of the Altiero Spinelli Prize for Outreach for Eurologgers in 2018. To you, dear audience, just a remark, translation is available into German and from German. And so is the Zoom app, since there will be not any question and answer session with the audience, there will be not any chat opportunity available, unfortunately. Now back to German. Das EU-Viertel liegt in diesen Tagen, wie seit Monaten natürlich sehr, scheint eher die Ruhe vor dem Sturm zu sein. Übermorgen kommen hier die Staats- und Regierungschefs der Union. Es wird natürlich um das leidige Thema, was uns nach wie vor beschäftigt, den Brexit gehen. Und es wird um ein heißes Eisen gehen, das Eszter und ich jetzt gemeinsam anpacken werden, nämlich den Konflikt der 25 EU-Staaten mit Ungarn und Polen um die Verknüpfung des sogenannten Rechtsstaatlichkeitsmechanismus mit den Zahlungen aus dem EU-Haushalt für die kommenden 7 Jahre und auch das große Wiederaufbauprogramm, das im Zuge der Corona-Pandemie jetzt aufgestellt worden ist. Insgesamt gesehen geht es da ja um einen Riesenbatzen, 1,8 Billionen Euro. Aber es geht nicht nur ums liebe Geld, wo ja bekanntlich die Freundschaft aufhört, sondern es geht um die Grundwerte, die dieser Gemeinschaft, einer Wertegemeinschaft zugrunde liegen. Und das ist ein Anliegen, das unserem Gastgeber, dem Minister für Bundeseuropa und internationale Angelegenheiten des Landes Nordrhein-Westfalen, Dr. Stefan Holter-Pförtner, besonders am Herzen liegt. Sehr, das wird er gleich selbst sagen. Bitte, Herr Minister, Sie haben das Wort.
Guten Morgen nach Brüssel, verehrte Frau Zalan, sehr geehrter Herr Stabenow, verehrte Botschafterin Rustanovic, sehr verehrte Generalkonsulin Nawaz, sehr geehrter Herr Generalkonsul Schürmann, lieber Herr Staatsminister Kuschke, meine sehr verehrten Damen, meine Herren, ich freue mich mit Ihnen heute in diesem Format 2 Tage vor dem anstehenden Europäischen Rat am 10. und am 11. Dezember zusammenkommen zu können. Die Landesregierung Nordrhein-Westfalens begrüßt die vom Ausschuss der ständigen Vertreter im Rat am 16. November 2020 beschlossene Verordnung über die Rechtsstaatskonditionalität. Diese knüpft die Auszahlung von EU-Geldern an die Einhaltung der Rechtsstaatlichkeit. Dabei wird verhindert, dass EU-Fördermittel für Projekte der Zivilgesellschaft zugunsten des Staates einbehalten werden. Das ist ein guter, das ist ein wichtiger Schritt. Der Beschluss im Rat erfolgte gegen die Stimmen von Polen und Ungarn. Diese haben ihr Veto gegen den nächsten mehrjährigen Finanzrahmen und gegen Next Generation EU eingelegt. Die Fronten in diesem Konflikt scheinen verhärtet. Die Position der Landesregierung von Nordrhein-Westfalen ist sehr klar und eindeutig. Die Rechtsstaatlichkeit darf für die Europäische Union nicht verhandelbar sein. Das muss allen Regierungen klar sein, die von europäischen Mitteln profitieren und gleichzeitig die Gewaltenteilung abschaffen wollen. Der Schutz der Freiheit, Der Schutz der Grundrechte aller Bürgerinnen und Bürger in den Mitgliedstaaten ist Kern der europäischen Idee. Im Interesse ihrer eigenen Überlebensfähigkeit ist die Europäische Union, da sind wir alle verpflichtet, wehrhafte Demokratien zu sein. Wenn Mitgliedstaaten Zweifel an der Rechtmäßigkeit und der Legitimität dieses Instruments haben, haben sie das Recht, den Weg der Anfechtung an den Europäischen Gerichtshof zu gehen. Die durch das Veto gestoppten, dringend benötigten Aufbaumittel müssen Mitgliedstaaten in großen Nöten so bald wie möglich zur Verfügung stehen. Das zu instrumentalisieren, sagt man in Baden-Württemberg, hat Geschmäckle. In Brüssel wird mit dem Hochdruck an einer gemeinsamen Lösung gearbeitet. Dabei darf es keine Denkverbote geben. Es muss alles getan werden, um ein mögliches Auseinanderdriften zu verhindern. Beim Verlassen der Konditionalitätsmechanismen wäre aber das Mögliche überschritten. Ich freue mich außerordentlich, dass wir mit Frau Zalan eine hervorragende Kennerin der Brüsseler Politik gewonnen haben. Ich bin gespannt auf Ihre Einblicke und Einschätzungen zu den Vorschlägen im Streit um den EU-Haushalt, die das Sekretariat des Rates derzeit erarbeitet. Ich wünsche Ihnen, ich wünsche uns allen jetzt eine anregende Diskussion und gebe nun das virtuelle Mikrofon an Sie, Herr Stabenow, zurück.
Vielen Dank, Herr Minister. Before, Eszter, we talk about the questions which probably we cannot answer in detail, namely what will happen tomorrow, today, in the coming days. Perhaps let's just go a bit back into the past, just to analyze how we got here. 30 years ago, in 1989, the Iron Curtain fell. Hungary had a very prominent role at the time. About 3 months ago, Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, and Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, they met on the historical site in Sopron, in the Hungarian town where the Pan-European picnic took place at the time. That was really a symbol then and now perhaps as well of how Europe entered a new era, German reunification, and then what we witnessed afterwards, the big enlargement process, a lot of enthusiasm. And then, as we see, things changed quite a bit. Although the origin was Europe is a community of values, common principle, freedom of press is something which is very important for you and me, of course, but generally speaking, democratic values, the independence of the judiciary and so forth, all these values are important. And as the minister said, that's something, the rule of law cannot be negotiated. That's where we are today. But how did we get to that situation that Europe, which was at the time seen as a huge opportunity for both sides. Being a German, I know what I'm talking about with reunification, but there was more. There was the unification of Europe. And now there's some sort of skepticism and distance, and all of this ended up in this horrible situation we're in now, that a country like Hungary, where you come from, and Poland, that gained democracy rights after 30 years of communism, all of a sudden have a problem with this European institution that symbolizes all these values. How did we get here?
Yes, that's the big question, and thank you very much for the invitation. I think what we have to look at, though, is also how I think the EU was just not prepared for the idea that a member state or a government would just steer away from European values, and it did not take probably seriously enough the acts of Orban, with starting in 2011 with the new constitution and the media law. It was perceived as an isolated event somewhere, on the periphery. And for years, I think the EU has struggled to understand that this could become a structural problem, and with other governments seeing how Hungary gets away with it, could get ideas themselves. But to answer your more profound question with regards to the transition, I think it's also important to note that while there is a large support for membership in the EU in Hungary and Poland as well, I think there's also there's been also a sense of disillusionment, especially with the economic results. I mean, obviously, the countries are more prosperous than they were 30 years ago, but there's a lot of inequality and a lot of people had to go through economic hardship. So there is a general sense of disillusionment as well, that these parties that run Hungary and Poland now could exploit for criticism. But I would also like differentiate between, you know, Hungary and Poland and the Hungarian government and the Polish government, because in Hungary, at least, I mean, this is very much this EU skeptic rhetoric is very much coming from the government and not necessarily is a general sentiment.
Yes, perhaps to try to establish more differences between Poland and Hungary. I mean, the row, so to say, between the European institutions and both member states circle, of course, around rule of law issues, but in Poland, very much it's about the judicial reform.
Yes.
It's also about a sense that Poland has a more difficulty. It's a society where tradition are really strongly enhanced. You can see it on the abortion debate. I mean, there are differences. What's your sense of the Polish situation? Perhaps if we can first talk about that.
I would, with regards to opposition to the rule of law, I would make one, there are very distinct reasons, I think. I mean, with Hungary, I think there's a lot of concern in the government that the system that they've built, the Fidesz party has built, will not be manageable if they don't have access to EU funds. And of course, I'm talking about corruption. So if there's this rule of law mechanism could really bite, and I think that's why the strong reaction from Hungary. I think in the case of Poland, it's different in the sense that they had, from their point of view, a negative experience with the judiciary and how their what they call reforms had created problems with the EU, and which they perceive as interference in their internal affairs, but also the current opposition to the rule of law mechanism has to do a lot with how the coalition works in Poland, and it's very much an internal struggle because the perhaps more extreme or more anti-EU, more traditionalist forces within the government push Prime Minister Morawiecki and portray this as a confidence issue in him, and this seems to be working for now. I mean, a couple of days ago we had the Deputy Prime Minister saying that the veto should be lifted. Mm-hmm. He's from a different party in the coalition, so there's clearly a division in there, but it seems to be the extremist position seems to be winning for the moment.
Corruption is less an issue in Poland than it is in Hungary.
On a systematic level, yes, it's less of an issue.
Something that probably is common to both countries is this idea that while the population, as you said, in both countries is still largely in favor of membership in the European Union, on the other hand, there's this sense that there's an interference. Europe is seen less than in traditional member states, the old member states. It's something which is seen as a distant force, even threatening, sometimes people say, a colonialist element. Viktor Orban even compared the way that the 25 wanted to go about an attitude like the Soviet Union. I mean, how does that is possible? How is it possible to explain that this sentiment is so strongly enshrined 30 years after the fall of the communist regime?
Yes, this is also a very complex question. I think there's, there is again a deeper sense, perhaps at some levels of the Polish and Hungarian society that people remained second-class citizens in the EU, and perhaps after the transition there wasn't, a discussion like returning after, in a long-term, in a long-distance relationship when finally the two couples meet. There wasn't a discussion about the difficult issues, only the happy issues. So maybe, there's also there was an economic reunion definitely, but perhaps not so much as a political or on a level of political discourse. So that could be a reason as well.
Yes.
For this, but I would have to say that that the comparisons to the Soviet Union and all that is, of course, is also for Orban to remind people to tap into that feeling that he used to be an anti-communist leader, and on the other hand, I think it also has to do with a little bit of the mentality of the Hungarians and the Polish, who often see themselves as victims of history, and now we're being attacked by these. I mean, these are deep emotions that Orban very cleverly taps into, and of course uses them for his own political tactics.
Yes, I think that's a common feature, that this is, of course, also used for domestic policy purposes, and we've seen it during the elections. Something that is also a fact is that Orban has been around for a long time. The European partners have been used to the way that he deals with some of the fundamental rights issue, the media, for instance, as well. We've seen the way how he got rid of the Central European University, the problem of financing of non-governmental organizations. So that's something which is not new. The Kaczynski brothers at the time were around 15 years ago. Europe had an experience. Then you had the spell with Donald Tusk for a couple of years when the platform came to power again. But Europe has been used, but still they never found the right answer. Is the tactics, strategy of the partners, is that the problem?
On the EU side,
yes.
I think in the beginning, like I said, there was a sense that this is, that at the end of the day, Orban will fall back into line. That this is, this is something from an ambitious young leader, and just he wants to show his colors, but eventually he will fall back into line. And this idea persisted for years. And I think in the sense, the EU lost a lot of time while it could have thought about new tools, perhaps, or launching tools that were already at its disposal. But I mean, it's a really difficult balance that I think we can see now. Chancellor Merkel also struggling with, is that on one hand you want to enforce rules and insist on the common values, but you also want to keep the unity of the EU. I mean, I am, as a private Hungarian citizen, worried, if this can spiral out of control. So it's a very difficult balance. I mean, what it seemed that the Juncker Commission might have been more forceful, definitely towards Poland, fearing that this is a contagious model, and perhaps the von der Leyen Commission thought that let's have a restart and be more appeasing or be more accommodating. But I think it's now out of that area where you can control it, you can manage it now.
Perhaps that's a good idea, just to turn to the situation that we're facing now. Perhaps just one remark. There's this Article 7 procedure, which was introduced in the wake of what happened in Austria 20 years ago, a coalition government between Wolfgang Schüssel, the Christian Democrats in Austria, and the right-wing party FPÖ. And this wasn't as tough as some people had hoped at the time. So we've witnessed that Article 7 is something that you cannot really use for situations as we witness now in Poland and Hungary. That's why this idea came up to link the payment of European funds to the rule of law. So we have this mechanism now, and that's where we are now. We had a compromise in July, some sort of compromise, an agreement in the European Council. We had also an agreement with the European Parliament, but yet now there's still this threat of a veto. Yesterday, foreign ministers met, and now we have a 24-hour ultimatum for Warsaw and Budapest to react and to accept what's on the table. So where do we go from here?
Yes, and Prime Minister Orban and Morawiecki had a video conference last night. We don't know exactly what is the outcome yet, but yes, today probably we'll get the answer if this veto persists or not. With regards to Article 7, I mean, there also we have to see that actually the process is stuck because there isn't enough support among other member states to move ahead with sanctions. So I think we also have to look at how difficult it is to single out one another, even if one would perceive that the evidence is there. The idea came up to link rule of law to the EU funds, also rightly, because I think taxpayers around Europe, and especially in countries which are net contributors, thought that why are we financing governments like this? The actual text that came out really strictly links the policing of these values to the EU funds. So this was already seen as a compromise from the side that thought that broader democratic rights should be policed. However, I have to say that I think EU leaders bear some sort of a responsibility for the situation where we are today, because in July, the conclusions they adopted were much vaguer than the proposals before, and actually I think opened up the space for Orbán and others who wanted to join to push as far as they could. I understand that there was like a 5-day summit in July, so it was difficult to have another round again on an equally difficult issue, and the sort of usual EU solution was adopted to have a vague text and solve the problem down the line. But here we are, and it wasn't resolved completely in July, and so now it's still here with us.
And what's next? The question is, I mean, there's a proposal to have a solution where the 25 member states would come together, either in the form of enhanced cooperation or via an intergovernmental agreement, just to push forward. But this is also, at least today, it's a means of putting pressure. There's also some talk of a declaration which would give guarantees to Hungarians who are very wary about the migration issue, but the Poles too, that this should not be linked. Do you see a sense that things might move on the basis of this ultimatum? I mean, this is the $1,000 million
I know, that's
question.
$1 million question, and I really don't have I don't have an answer. I mean, diplomats are very tight-lipped on all sides on how things are developing, because it's such a sensitive issue. For me, it would be difficult to see how Orbán could climb back from where he is. But of course, for him, it's a question of rhetoric, so he could do it. So I would assume that the veto would persist, and the recovery fund would have to go on in a circle of 25 member states. Nevertheless, I mean, it is still surprising to push it this far, because there's a lot of money at stake for Hungary and Poland.
How badly would the Hungarian and the Polish economy be affected?
Well, maybe not that much with the loss of the recovery fund, especially in the case of Hungary, but with the delay of the MFF, a lot. I mean, I've heard the figure, or I read the figure of 180 billion euros for the two countries. That would be the total loss for the next years, and especially in a pandemic situation. Even though the two economies did well before, I mean, this would be much needed, and so. I mean, Orbán already said that, okay, fine, we'll go to the markets if this doesn't happen. Although some years ago he was fighting a freedom fight against, being owning money to the markets. So this is clearly against the economic interest, at least, of the country. So I wonder how far they push, and what alternatives. And I think here, especially in Poland, this could create internal problems, and might create. And I guess that was the strategy for the EU 24 as well, that this could create a momentum in Poland that could perhaps make them.
We are not there yet. On the contrary, I mean, the noises that we get from both Budapest and Warsaw are quite strong.
Yes.
I mean,
no. Like I said, I mean, my assumption would be that the veto would be sustained. I mean, but I would be amazed. My sense is that the original goal, or the political goal, is to make this acceptance of this conditionality, rule of law conditionality, so painful for the entire EU that it's never used, or it's perceived as another nuclear option, like the Article 7 before. And you know that the Commission and member states would think 100 times before they use it, if it goes ahead at all.
But if the text, which was on the table and which might be on the table at the end, is so vague, then Poland and Hungary shouldn't have really too many worries.
I meant that the July yes. Conclusions are vague, and I think that's why it opened it up for interpretation for Orban. But the legal text itself, I think it's quite clear of what could trigger this mechanism, and it's really tied directly to the use of EU funds.
Yes.
So the Polish and Hungarian government's arguments that this is about migration, this is about gay rights, is just it's you know, it's not there. There's no proof. You have to link it to the correct way of using funds, and the only thing that is tied in is the judiciary, in the sense that if there is no prosecution of systematic misuse of EU funds, then you can trigger the conditionality if the Commission thinks that it can defend its position in court, because as you know, any such action would have to stand the test of courts. So this would not be a plainly political tool, as
how
the
do you
Polish
define,
government.
I mean, if it comes to the court, the idea that there should be a serious risk to the budget established? I mean, this is also perhaps vague. That's some critics at least say that. But you think that the text is more watertight, certainly, than the one that was on the table in July?
Yes,
yeah,
that's
okay.
Definitely. I mean, that's a legal question. What's a serious risk?
Yeah.
But often with the infringement procedures, the issue was that the court decision came years after the actions of the Hungarian government, and there was no way to remedy the situation. So that the serious risk is there, so that actual situations can be still remedied.
Okay. You see that we could go on
for hours
and
yes.
hours, but we are somehow like the European governments turning around in circles. But of course, we have to touch upon another issue. Before that, of course, I want to point out that Prime Minister Morawiecki had a very, very harsh op-ed in a number of media outlets like the German Handelsblatt. And he also said that countries like the Netherlands and Denmark or so, they may make these noises about the rule of law because they wanted just to take the advantage of the internal market, but they didn't want to pay in the end for Hungary. But I think that's for our next discussion. But since you come from Hungary and you're, of course, very familiar, having worked yourself for Hungarian media with the situation. We've had the incident last week, which was talked a lot about with Joseph Sayer, the leader of the EPP group in the parliament, having to resign. There is a particular relationship between EPP, the European People's Party, and Fidesz, which is a member but is suspended now. And there also the tone is mounting. I mean, Viktor Orban has written a letter to Manfred Weber, the chair of the EPP group in the European Parliament. He also suggested that one should take an example on the model when the British Tories were part of the common group, the EPP-ED, European Democrats group, and he wants to model that. What do you make of this Hungarian Brussels and EPP, and also to some extent probably German role?
Yes, I mean the troubles between Fidesz and EPP has been going on for years, and you would also always wait. You know, what will be the tipping point? What will be the issue that tips the thing over that Fidesz would be suspended, and perhaps this not necessarily the incidents with the MEP Sayer or with MEP Deutsch, who made the comments regarding Mr. Weber's comments. But the veto on the MFF and the recovery fund could be the tipping point. But yes, it very much highlights the difficult situation that I think Germany is in, because it's a more focused picture of what's happening in the council itself. I mean, more liberal Nordic Benelux members of the EPP would already kick Fidesz out. French, Italian, Spanish members are more reluctant, actually supportive of Fidesz, and the Germany or the CDU, CSU is stuck in the middle and trying to manage keeping the group together, keeping it the largest group in the parliament, while also maintaining some sort of coherence. It's interesting how Donald Tusk came in to the leadership of the larger EPP party, so not only the group. I think he sort of calculated how much leverage Fidesz still has in the party. I think he is really looking at suspending Fidesz. He wrote a very heartfelt letter a couple of months ago to all the member parties, saying you have to look into yourself and see what kind of party, what kind of values you want this party to go along with. And when we meet in person, because the suspension is, or the expulsion is something that has to happen in person, then we vote on it. I think what Orbán is offering is probably more his interest than EPP's interest. But again, it also, is something that reminds me of how exactly the British Conservatives behaved and how it ended up in Brexit. I mean, of course, these are very different contexts and circumstances. But I'm worried that in the case of Fidesz, this could spiral out of control. I mean, there's a lot of support for EU membership in Hungary, but Fidesz also has a lot of leverage in the Hungarian media. So it's a question of what you want to do.
Following the British example of getting rid of the European Union. No, for obvious economic reasons. Yes, yeah. But the main argument, I think, in this debate, sometimes forgotten about a bit, is that people who say that we should somehow keep the ties with Fidesz, they say it's better to have the little devil in the family than outside. So what do you make of it?
Yes. I mean, this was definitely the strategy of Joseph Daul, the previous EPP president, who said Orbán is an enfant terrible. So he's the black sheep of the family, but he's part of the family. I mean, that hasn't really worked. It's not, with, for example, I think the most visible failure in that was the issue of the CEU, where I think Manfred Weber put a lot of political capital in trying to keep the Central European University in Budapest and somehow convince Orbán, and then Orbán wouldn't even give a gesture. So I think he's not only an enfant terrible, but a clear challenger to EPP. I mean, a couple of years ago, Orbán made a speech. If EPP doesn't turn towards a more conservative, more nationalistic, his kind of interpretation of Christian democracy, then EPP will be done with. So there is a bit of an existential threat for EPP as well. I mean, would there be anybody to follow Orbán? Maybe the Slovenians. Okay, it's a small delegation, but you never know. I mean, how he'll spin his possible departure.
We both know Manfred Weber, who is someone who is a very quiet, sometimes a restrained person.
Yes.
It's surprising for a leader of the largest group in the European Parliament, but he's really very angry. I mean, if it's true what you hear and you read in the media. So what do you think this time around? Does perhaps the other question that you can't answer. We cannot answer what will happen in relation to the major row between Poland, Hungary, and the rest. But this one, do you have an idea? Will the EPP throw the Fidesz party out in the end?
I think now, especially with this veto, we could have reached a tipping point. And also, just as you mentioned rightly, I mean, before there was Joseph Daul, now there's Donald Tusk, who at the head of the party, who's much more supportive of the position that the EPP needs to put Fidesz out. Also, Manfred Weber, while I think he was also on the side of accommodating this problem, now is angry. I mean, let's just think that he could have been the Commission president had this Spitzenkandidat system had been followed. But Orban specifically said that no, he doesn't want him. So it's also personal.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much
for that clearer answer, although we're not 100% sure, but
yeah.
We'll see what will happen on both issues. Thanks very much. Auf Deutsch nochmal, uns bleibt natürlich jetzt abzuwarten, wie sich die Ereignisse entwickeln, und mir bleibt, liebe Zuschauerinnen und Zuschauer, Ihnen zu danken, especially also to Eszter, für Ihre klare und engagierte Einordnung in dieses wirklich schwierige Thema, das zu Recht auch Emotionen weckt, aber es geht nicht um weniger als ein Europa, das vielleicht überhaupt das Modell einer europäischen oder einer internationalen Wertegemeinschaft ist. Und damit verabschieden wir uns aus Brüssel